Many of you know I have a program called the Koan of Chronic Illness, the Koan of Illness, there's the link, in which I have a whole series of courses that I teach and a whole bunch of information about chronic illness and things like that. So if anybody's interested, you can visit that page. This I started about 5 years ago, and sort of trying to bring together everything I knew about illness and about Integral into these courses. And it's been a really great experience, and I've met some phenomenal people as a result of it. I've been involved in the illness world for probably 35, nearly 40 years, starting when my son got sick. And I've worked, I started a program at DePaul University, and I've been teaching courses on it and things like that. So anyway, that's the background. So what I want to do today is take a look at how some first tier values and quadrant reductionism cause problems for people with chronic illness. And I want to suggest how some integral values can improve the way that we relate to illness and the people who have it. So you can see here 3 integral themes that I think are largely encompassing the whole integral movement. One of them is worldviews, the whole idea of perspectives. And each one of the models, the AQUIL models, the stages, states, lines, types, and stages, states, lines, types, and quadrants, all deal with different perspectives. So I'm going to take a look at 2 here, particularly the stage perspectives and the quadrant perspectives that most affect chronic illness. Another theme I want to look at is the idea of wholeness. Integral is all about wholeness, about integrating. And in this context, I want to talk about illness as being intrinsic to life, something that in order to be fully whole, we need to embrace. And then the third theme I want to talk about is growth and evolution, and seeing chronic illness as a path to personal and spiritual growth. Now, it's rare to find, in my sense of the healthcare world, it's rare to find an embrace of full spectrum, full quadrant views. It's rare to see that anybody sees illness as intrinsic to life, and it's rare that people view illness as anything but a problem. And it's also clear that the management of illness is dominated by first-tier views, not integral views, which is not surprising since there are very few people at higher stages. But hopefully we will find more higher integral stage ideas filtering their way into the healthcare world. So I'm going to start with worldviews. You'll probably recognize this model. This is Jeff Salzman's model from the Daily Evolver. He put this out of the stages. And we can look here at some of the stage perspectives on illness. We're starting with the red tribal view. Red is all about power, getting power and autonomy and all that sort of thing. So when illness comes along in the red world, it's seen often as a sign of weakness. It's not what you don't want to admit it because it's going to take, well, it's going to take your power away, and you don't want other people to see that your power has been taken away. At amber, where there's a big focus on belonging, being a part of the group, doing things right, looking like everybody else, acting like everybody else. When illness comes along, it's a way of being separate. It tends to separate you out. You can't be part of the group in the same way that you have been. When you get to the orange stage, orange is all about success and achievement and status. And so illness now becomes an interference with success. You can't do what you used to do before. You can't be in your organization. You can't be accumulating merit. You can't be doing all these kinds of things. And then at green, illness is often seen as a sign of misalignment. So you are in some way regarded as not being fully in tune with your body, with your spiritual self, with your emotional self, so that you are you're out of alignment. And once again, you don't quite fit in. So as you can see, all these perspectives are pretty negative ones. They're ones that cause people to lose the capacity to engage with the stage, with the worldview that they're most comfortable with. So, you know, maybe there's some kindness in there, maybe there's some sadness in there, but mostly it's all about how the person does not fit into the world. So I want to say that Integral can do better. That Integral can look at illness as an aspect of life and as a source of growth, instead of simply weakness, separateness, interference with success, and misalignment. So if we look at the quadrants, we can see a similar situation. So, or well, thinking about the stages or any other quadrant. So you can see that that people believe they, actually this should say, I'm sorry. People think that their perspective, that they have found the answer and it will solve all of the problems. So whatever perspective you have, whatever quadrant you're coming from or whatever stage you're coming from, you sit there and you look at your answer and you say, this is it. So the guy over here is, boat's coming, okay, answer. This guy over here is sitting in the boat looking at the land of the answer. But if you get up above, you can see both of these people are seriously mistaken. They do not have a way out. And so, so we can think of all of these perspectives that's believing that they have the answer when in fact they don't. So now to go to the quadrant, we can talk about the quadrants. So illness is viewed in multiple ways in the different quadrants as well. We'll find that most of what modern medicine deals with is the right-hand quadrants. It's a very objective science. It's about the body. You go in, you have some body part that has a problem. Your behavior is what's looked at. Your body is what's looked at. People are concerned, medical people, with their competence, with skills, that sort of thing. The system has control. You need to fit into the system. You use technology, government policy, all those kinds of things affect illness. And so that has been largely the orange world that has developed this aspect of healthcare. Now, it's got tremendous advantages, as we all know. I'm sure all of us have taken advantage in one way or another of the fantastic advances that we've had in healthcare. But the problem is it tends to almost completely ignore the left-hand quadrants, the subjective quadrants. You know, what is the patient actually experiencing? What are they feeling like? What are they thinking? The intersubjective, how is this affecting the family? How is it affecting relationships at work? What about the media? What about the cultural background and all those kinds of things? So all of those are areas that traditional medicine has not really looked at. So green has come along to try to do that, to help that. So here's the orange focus. So you can see in the right-hand quadrants, we have high-tech, low-touch, people as body parts. We have a focus on acute illness, and this becomes really significant because that's the idea that, okay, you're ill, you come, you get fixed, and you go away. Well, as with chronic illness, we see that doesn't happen. In this orange focus, the system prevails over individual needs. And also the patient now has become responsible through this managed care idea. There are many different aspects that come into medicine, but the patient ends up having to manage them all. So green comes along, sees this problem and says, whoa, we got to move into the left-hand quadrants. Nobody's paying any attention to this. So the green focus is on people as psychological and spiritual beings. It's on the idea of prevention, living a healthy life so that you don't get ill, and on longer term. There's a belief that individual needs should prevail over the system, that there should be individualized medicine, and that people should be treated as whole people. The patient is still responsible. You're the cause, you're the cure, usually, of your illness in this focus. But both of these points of view, the orange and the green, while they have their benefits, they both put the burden of illness on the individual. According to the orange point of view, You need to get better using the conventional medical system. You need to get a healthy lifestyle, get out there, exercise, eat right, and all that. And you need to get back on track. And if anybody wants the PowerPoint, I can share that. So you don't have to, I see Mary taking a picture. So if you want to save yourself the trouble. So the idea is get back on track, get yourself healed, get back into this orange world that you're a part of. Green says you better get better, but probably using alternative therapies, often shutting out the conventional therapies. And you need to clean up your psyche because that's what's causing the problems here, essentially. And you need to connect with life, with others. But both of these views have a tendency to induce guilt, shame, and inadequacy. Because if you're sick and you can't get better, and you've used the conventional medical system and you've gotten a healthy lifestyle and you've worked on your psyche and you've used these alternative therapies and you're still sick, now you feel like somehow you've done it wrong, you're inadequate. So there's a terrible burden of guilt and shame that falls on people. Also, particularly with the green view, there's a lot of psychologizing and spiritual bypassing. There's a main belief that if you worked on your psychological issues, you wouldn't have illness, or you'd be able to cure it. Or there's the spiritual bypassing. If you were just more spiritual, you would cure yourself, or maybe you'd be humble enough to see the lesson in your illness and begin to work on that. And there's also a very strong attitude among the New Age green community. Don't look at the negative, just focus on the positive, or you'll make yourself worse. So now you become afraid of your own thoughts, afraid of your own psyche, sure that somehow you have done something terrible and it's all your fault that you're ill. So while we're glad to find the more sensitive green point of view, we also are wrestling with a lot of problems as a result of that. You also see that it used to be the doctor who managed your care. Under the amber point of view, the doctor managed everything. You went to the doctor and he set it all up for you and this is what you did. The doctor also tended to know you and your family situation and you trusted him, but that has all given way to this patient responsibility idea, the idea that it's your fault that you're ill and it's your job to deal with it. So while orange blames lifestyle like smoking, poor eating, lack of exercise, and ignores the context like maybe poverty or gender, they tend to believe that just as the poor have equal opportunity in work, so the sick have equal opportunity in healing. So they ignore the context. So green comes along and notices the context, but still says it's your fault. You're responsible for getting sick in the first place and you're responsible for staying sick. It's your fault. So these approaches tend to cause a lot of harm to the patient. I don't see rest is nowhere in the picture. And illness becomes a badge of shame. Somehow I couldn't do it. I couldn't get myself out of this hole. It's also true that very often people who have these mindsets don't hesitate to suggest to people who have a chronic illness that if only they got over their anger, or they learned to meditate, or they took a course in trauma management, or they realized they have sickness beliefs, they wouldn't be sick. And doctors with this mindset very often send physically ill people off to psychiatrists simply because when they don't know what's wrong, they assume it's the patient's fault, the patient's interior. So now you're not even allowed to feel the pain and the anger and the frustration that you feel, because now that's going to make you sicker. So we become afraid of our feelings, afraid we're neurotic, afraid we're not spiritual, and that sort of thing. So these approaches tend to come to us from everywhere. And why does this happen? And I think a lot of it is because people, when they come face to face with illness and another person, suffering and another person, they don't know what to do. They feel difficult. They feel awkward. They don't want to see the person suffer. So they resort to whatever is uppermost in their thinking. Well, if you only did this, or let me tell you about that, or I just read this book, or I saw this article. And what they don't realize is they've just seen this article, but the person they're talking to may have been dealing with an illness for 25 or 30 years. it's very likely they have tried all of these things. They are aware of them. They live in the same culture as the rest of us do. So often this kind of fixing attitude that we take causes people to feel bad and hopeless about themselves and sort of foolish, as if they are, well, being condescended to. This kind of attitude can be even abusive to the person with illness and cause additional suffering. This point of view also can prevent somebody from getting effective help. And we see it happening now with long COVID. People are not believed, or they're sent for psychological treatment or told to exercise, when research shows that for many of these post-viral conditions, exercise is the worst thing you can do and leads sometimes to years of disability. So there's very little understanding of chronic illness. And if one adopts the idea that it's all in the psyche, they can avoid effective help. So for example, their panic attacks can be a sign of adrenal insufficiency. And if they are treated as solely a psychological issue and nobody goes to conventional medicine and tries to find out something about them, they can actually die. So the point is both are so important, and locating oneself in either half of these quadrants is not helpful. So it also it delays collective action on illness. And we can see this at work in many illnesses that don't have clear biological markers like fibromyalgia or ME/CFS, and what used to be the case with autism and MS. As soon as you decide it's all in your head, or it's not a matter for, it's for the interior, then research dries up. Researchers don't want to research in something that's going to be a dead end for their career that doesn't exist in the minds of a lot of doctors. Doctors don't want to be made a fool of for trying to treat something that other people tell them is just psychological. And the government doesn't put out money for it. So I've watched this, particularly over the years with ME/CFS, that the incredible paucity of attention has come largely because the initial researchers just called it, yuppie flu and things like that. And that scared off the researchers, and it scared off the money. So years can go by before any attention is paid. This kind of attitude also supports insurance company denials of legitimate physical illnesses. So if people have been told it's all in their heads, it's not a real illness, and then they try to get some sort of help because now they're incapacitated for the rest of their lives, insurance companies find it much easier to deny these things. So there are several problems with this idea of psychologizing illness. And I don't mean to downplay the idea that we don't need to work on our psyches, because we certainly do. And illness is a 4-quadrant affair. It is also an upper left quadrant affair. So definitely we do. Everything we can do to improve our interior selves is likely going to improve our immune system. The point I'm making is that by quadrant reductionism, staying only in this quadrant is where we develop the problems. So when we psychologize illness in this way, we are ignoring the fact that illness can derive from any of the 4 quadrants. It isn't derived only from upper left problems. We can have upper left stress, yes, that can cause illness, but so can upper right heredity. Genetics can cause illness. We can have lower left unhealthy cultural practices. Perhaps you're part of a group that has strange dietary practices or things like that harm your health. And the lower right systemic practice, because medical practices, corporate and government practices can also lead to illness. So an example, taking an upper right medication might make you feel a little better, but it won't resolve the emotional stress that is damaging your immune system. So you need to look at both halves. But it works the other way as well. If you've inherited a tendency to diabetes, working on your illness beliefs is not likely to cure it. If you're working in a sick building, healing your psyche may make you happier, but it likely won't heal the problem that's really at the root. Or if unaddressed problems of race and poverty leave your neighborhood without access to good medical care, you need regular dialysis, say, healing your anger at your mother isn't going to solve the issue. So each one influences the other. Inner health helps outer health helps the psychology, but one alone is not usually useful. And also it ignores the hosts of healthy people with terrible diets, miserable relationships, and screwed up psyches who seem to just bound along perfectly well. And these are the people who are often more than happy to give advice to the other people, even though their own lives are not models for behavior. It also ignores the large number of grown-up and awake people who have a chronic illness. Almost every teacher I have had, in fact, I think Ken Wilber has had a long-term serious illness, Adyashanti the same, Father Thomas Keating, Francis Bennett, Doshin Michael Nelson Roshi, Jeff Foster, and now Terry Patton, all are suffering from significant illnesses. And those are among the most awake and spiritual people that we find. So I find this green view annoying in many respects, and this is one of them when we ignore this. It also assumes too much. It assumes that we know what's right, that we can see the big picture and we know what is right for other people. And I've made this mistake a number of times. I have recommended a course of action to somebody and seen it go badly. And it's taught me a real lesson that I don't know. It also assumes we have the power to create our own reality. And this is a big question. And obviously there are many ways in which we do create our reality, but there are many in which we don't. And so once again, I'm arguing against taking this narrow position. Because, for example, karma, in some ways of looking at it, determines whether or not we get illness. Chance can, so you live in Chernobyl and it blows up. It's hard to say that you created that reality. COVID-19 shows up all around the globe. Did any individual person create that? No, it's just here. Genetics can cause our reality. Maybe in some cases it's a soul choice. We could say a person has come into this life to be of service as a canary in the mind, somebody who gets ill and shows other people where the problems are. And then we can look at the two truths doctrine of the relative and the absolute, in which in the absolute, everything is fine and perfect, but in the relative, it's not. People suffer. And then in the non-dual view, there's no doer. There's no self to create anything, and all is one. So this idea that we have the power to create our own reality, that individually we can manifest ourselves a car or manifest ourselves health, seems to me to be very limited. It also asks too much of somebody who's ill. So even if illness could in fact be overcome by a change in beliefs or a spiritual state, and it's possible, and I don't even deny the possibility that it could, it sets a very high bar that very few people can reach. So how many people are actually really fully free of neuroses or are fully awakened? And if we have to do that to get well, on top of having to manage an illness, is a giant mountain to climb that could take years. So whether the experience was due to karma or to soul heroism in taking on the role of the canary in the mind, or even if it is due to psychological causes, the person is suffering and is doing the best they can. So is it really up to us to judge what they need? I would suggest we need compassion and respect for this difficult life that this person has, and not judgment or quadrant reductionism or trivialization. As Ken Wilber says, we don't create our reality, we create our experience of reality. So we can come to a place where, as he says, it hurts more but bothers you less. But it still hurts. It's not that you get past that entirely. So what is a more integral approach? It would be to acknowledge the role of all four quadrants. So when dealing with illness, don't focus just on one side or the other, but focus on all of them. Let go of some magical beliefs about illness. Recognize the limitations of each worldview. and allow ourselves not to know the answers, to encourage discovery over certainty. And then to listen to the patient. If I've heard a complaint over the years, the most frequent complaint I've had is people do not listen. Doctors don't listen. Friends and family don't listen. They are always trying to second guess them or override their wisdom. So we need to respect their knowledge and experience and believe them. We need to exercise wisdom and compassion in offering suggestions. And we want to make sure we're not fixing the other person to avoid our own helplessness. And I think that happens, that it's when it's really hard to see another person we have this desperate desire to fix them. And it's very, very hard just to sit and be present with someone who is ill, which is, in my experience, what people most want, is somebody just to be with them and not try to fix them. So in the larger group, I did a small group discussion, and I'm going to put the questions off until the end at this point so we can go through and we can talk about things. But the questions that I brought up were, if we enlarge the conversation about cure and care in a way that avoids psychologizing and unrealistic expectations of patients, what might healthcare look like? Can we imagine another way of seeing healthcare? And if we avoided spiritual bypassing and guilt-inducing, how might people with illness feel more supported? Because there's a great lack of support out there for people with serious chronic illness. And then thinking personally, what could I do to bring a more integral view of chronic illness to people and organizations in my life? And one simple way is when there's a discussion and you can see that it's focused only on one quadrant or two quadrants, you can bring in the other one. Just mention it. It may wake people up to some ideas they haven't thought of. So now I want to move on to from the theme of perspectives to the theme of wholeness. Everything we've discussed up to now hangs on the idea that illness is an aberration, a hiatus from life, not a wholly integral part of life. But is that true? Susan Sontag says, once you go to the kingdom of the sick, you lose your place in the kingdom of the well. And the kingdom of the well is where everything is supposed to happen, according to healthy people. And we treat illness and people who have it as separate, in large part because the acute model of illness is what we use. Go off, get cured, come back to life. But with a chronic illness, that doesn't happen. So while we still want to look for solutions to suffering, it's important to recognize that suffering is part of life. It is what is. Both the kingdom of the well and the kingdom of the sick are part of our total reality. So here we can think about integral wholeness. And my son drew this picture here of the yin-yang symbol and said, this is what it feels like. That when you have an illness, you can feel mostly well and feel like you have a small part of you, or you can feel terribly sick and feel like there's only a small part of you that's healthy. But if you think for any body to function, it's got to be 90% at least functional. Everything has got to be working well. There is only a small part in any sick person that isn't working well. The rest of them, otherwise they would not be alive. And yet we tend to divide people in half. Okay, you're sick over here and you're well over there, not recognizing that anybody who is sick has a large wellness aspect. And we also have to recognize that anybody that is healthy has something that's not working. You really get past 30 without, a bum knee or a, digestive problem or a tendency to headache or something like that. You get something. The body's, just because it's a human body, it gets problems. And as we get older, we get more and more of them. So part of it is embracing in ourselves this fact that our body is neither sick nor well. Sometimes it's more sick, sometimes it's more well. And the body politic, all of us are the same. So the two questions here: can we embrace illness as part of our personal lives instead of trying to shove it out? Oh my God, I got a sickness. I have to get rid of it. I have to get it out of here. It's not supposed to be here. Can we say, no, this is just part of being human. This is part of my human experience. And then in the larger sense, can we embrace people with chronic illness as integral to our humanity and see that they play just as an important role as anybody else does? So there are ways to embrace chronic illness. One of them is this yin-yang principle. But another one is to think of this question, what do you turn away from? Ken Wilber raised this when he was talking about supermind. When you come to the last stages, well, the highest stage that he was working with, the idea is to see what you turn away from, because what you turn away from is what is preventing you from full awakening, and to bring it in. And often one of the last things that people will want to embrace is illness. So the idea is not lopping off the negative halves of life, but bringing it into life and recognizing it as a part of the whole. And so, there's a little video. So here is a young woman, she's probably 19 here, I think, speaking to us. She has cystic fibrosis.
When you pity people who are sick, you take away their...
Can you hear that? Probably not.
I am sick. I will probably always be sick. And yet I am 100% content and happy with my life. 100%. And I have something called cystic fibrosis, but I'm actually not here to depress you all about cystic fibrosis. I'm actually here to talk about how do we change the way that we treat sick people? How do we stop pitying them and we start empowering them? The way that our society works, we teach sick people that when they are sick, somehow, some way, they cannot be as happy as normal, healthy people, right? We teach them that their happiness, their contentment in life, their joy in life is tied to how healthy we are. And I remember I was around 7 or 8 years old, and I was like flipping through this magazine, and there's this really beautiful picture of like this artist in like their New York loft apartment, and I'm sitting there and I look around my hospital room and I'm like, I wish I was there. And I had a moment where I was like, but I'm stuck in the hospital. And I thought, well, you know, there's a Target right down the street that has some twinkle lights and some throw pillows, and I have a room, I have furniture. Why don't I make something out of this room? Why don't I deck it out? So me and my nanny decided to completely redo the hospital room. And I don't mean like just put some pictures on the wall. I mean like completely redo the room. We were like moving around the furniture. I was like sweating. My machines were beeping. The nurses were coming in like, what are you doing? You're crazy. And by the end, we had completely transformed the room. And nurses and doctors from all over the hospital came in to see it. And so every time I ended up going into the hospital, I would deck out my hospital room. I started to realize that people who are sick, and nurses and doctors as well, everyone in the medical community, everyone in the healthcare community, gets so stuck in this notion that a hospital room is this cold, sterile, white place where we go to be sick, and that's all that it can be. And we get so stuck in that we cannot see the possibility. We can't see what we can make out of it. We don't see what we can do with it. And I started realizing that our lives, in a way, are like this, right? Our lives are like empty hospital rooms. We get so stuck in the idea that, oh, it's supposed to be good or bad. Oh, if we're sick, well, you know, then it's cold and it's sterile, and we just have to live with it like that. We don't let ourselves realize, we don't let ourselves see, we can make that hospital room beautiful. We can make our lives into a piece of art. We all have that ability, we all have that capability as human beings to turn these empty hospital rooms, to turn these lives into something really beautiful. We look at people who are sick and we pity them because we believe that their sickness means their life has to be inherently less joyous than everyone else's. Yes. Life is not going to stop unfolding itself to you just because you're sick or just because your life isn't how you think it's supposed to be. There's still going to be beauty. And I can honestly say a majority of the happiest moments in my life have been when I'm sick in the hospital. Honestly. And think about the implications of that, because I have lived the kind of life that all of you spend your entire lives running from. I've been sick and dying my entire life, and yet I am so proud of my life. What does that say? No, really, what does that say about the way we're all living our lives? We're waiting to be healthy. We're waiting to be wealthy. We're waiting to find our passion. We're waiting to find our true love before we actually start living, instead of looking at everything that we have, looking at all the pain, looking at all the sadness, looking at all the beauty, and making something with that. That's how innovation happens. Innovation doesn't happen because there's some person who's in a great circumstance and everything's going well, and and they just get on a roll and they make something for the world. Innovation happens, art happens because of suffering. And when we clamp down to that suffering, when we teach people who are sick, when you teach little 7-year-old me that because I'm sick, I don't have anything to give to the world, I don't have anything to create. So I want to encourage you all, next time you meet someone who's suffering, who's in pain, instead of shutting down, instead of pitying them, why don't you think, I bet their life is so beautiful. Really look at them and think, I bet their life is so complex and beautiful. We all get to be a part of this giant human epic story, right? We get to be a part of human history. We get to add to it. We have something to give. And we realize it's what we're creating that matters. It's what we're adding to this beautiful story that matters. When we start looking at that, we can change the world.
So I think that expresses so beautifully what I'm trying to say here about embracing illness and bringing it into our lives instead of trying to shut it out either for ourselves or for anybody else. So the idea of transcend and include, I'm going to start sharing again. Back to my PowerPoint now. So we want to transcend and include. We don't want to just transcend illness, but we want to include it. And recognizing that being ill does not mean there is not growth going on. Every day, a person, even if they are confined to their bed, faces challenges. They face aspects that they have to work with. Their life is continuing to grow. And so even if you can't move or you can't do something, it doesn't mean you're not growing. And there was a woman in one of my classes who was at a workshop, and she was told at this workshop to go out and ask a tree what it might have to tell you. So she went out and found a tree, and she wrote this short poem called Exhortation. What the tree told me: stand tall and still, no matter what the distractions and noise. Stand tall and still, with your roots going deep and your branches reaching high. Offer shelter to those who seek it. Bear the fruit you were made to bear. Do not worry if the busy people do not notice you. Simply continue your work of holding the world together. You are quietly holding the world together. That is enough. So her name is Elizabeth Delbridge, and this is her website. So I thought that was a beautiful example of how one does not have to be doing something. A tree doesn't move, but it still is growing and is experiencing life. So I think also one of the benefits, if we can see the whole, we can see everything as belonging in life, is it raises this natural compassion in us, this capacity to care for everybody as if they were the self. And there's a wonderful poem called Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye, I'm not going to read the whole poem. If you want to look for it, it's beautiful. But I'll just read a stanza in it, which says, "Before you know the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive." So we're all vulnerable. We all face sickness and death, and knowing that should bring us together and not separate us. So ideally, we embrace illness as part of both our personal, individual lives, and also in the whole, we embrace it as part of our wholeness. Now, and even more than simply allowing illness to be a part of us, we can also view it as an excellent workshop for growth and evolution. So this is the third theme, the idea of growth, an integral theme. So while we can't cure all illness with shadow work and spiritual development, we can use illness as a path to growth. So let's look at some of the positive sides of illness now in that respect. So here we have the stages of development, and we can see that we can grow in all of these different ways. Illness is a disorienting dilemma, and disorienting dilemmas have been shown to be one of the things that leads to growth. Illness is disorienting in multiple ways. It shakes up an entire life. And so it leads to cognitive growth. For example, you get sick, you end up having to do research on your condition, trying to understand it. You have to understand the treatments. You end up probably managing a team of medical providers. That's another form of cognitive growth. You frequently have to fend off other people's beliefs about illness and thereby get more clear about what your own beliefs are. That's another type of cognitive development. Illness leads to emotional growth because there's an amazing amount of loss, pain, and suffering that goes on with illness. Just coping with this brings emotional growth. There's interpersonal growth. Relationships change. Maybe the spouse leaves you. Maybe you lose your job. You get new relationships with doctors. You find out, which friends can be around you and which friends cannot be around you. And you have to negotiate all of these relationship issues. So that's another line in which you develop with illness. Moral growth is another one. You need to try to understand ethical issues around treatment and care. You have to deal with the morality, the way people treat you and the way you treat other people, which can change also with illness. And then it comes to your self-identity. Who are you? Usually everything gets stripped away with chronic illness. You had a role as, maybe an important person at work, that's gone. You had a role sometimes as a parent and you're not able to take care of your children. And all kinds of issues come about with illness that change your whole sense of your identity. Who am I now if I'm a sick person? There was a program on Nova on CRISPR, which I think you probably know. It's a technique that allows for genetic alterations. And so the producer is talking to a boy, he's probably 12 or 13 years old, who has sickle cell anemia. And so the producer says to him, they're saying maybe one day with CRISPR, they could go in and change the gene in the embryo so that the kid, when it's born, doesn't have sickle cell. So the boy, David Sanchez is his name, he says, I guess that's kind of cool that they're thinking it can do that in the future, but I think that would be up to the kid later. And the producer says, what do you mean? And David says, there's a lot of things that I learned having sickle cell just because I had it. I learned patience with everyone. I learned just to be positive. So the producer says, so you don't wish you never had it? And David says, I don't wish that I never had it. No, I don't think I'd be me if I didn't have sickle cell. So there's another whole way to look at self-identity, that the identity you get sometimes from an illness is a deeper, more important one. I had somebody in my class just yesterday say that he was on track to be the executive with the corporate office, the corner office and the lead guy. And he got ill and lost all that. And he said, now I feel sorry for that person. He said, I am so glad that I didn't end up in that place. So it's a whole different way of seeing what it means. Okay. Chronic illness is also a superior path for spiritual growth. In addition to having to deal with all of those things that I mentioned in the previous slide, there are a lot of things that happen in illness that lead us, that are really spiritual practices. So people who are seriously ill, confined to bed, not able to do anything, they don't lie there and study physics as some people like to imagine they're doing. They're really not doing anything because they're not well enough even for that. And so they're in a state really of continuous meditation and contemplation, often in a darkened room, just with their own mind to watch. They are also constantly having to let go. There are constantly things that they cannot do that they would like to do. There's never-ending loss. And so that just this practice of letting go is very prominent for somebody with illness. The issue of acceptance of life, of what is. Can you live with things that other people would find really almost intolerable? Can you accept that? Can you accept life on its own terms? And then even more difficult, can you accept yourself? That's often very difficult for people. Can you accept yourself as a non-producer, as a person who is dependent, as a person who needs things? When you'd had a vision of yourself as active, producing, contributing, very difficult to do that. There's also a constant need to forgive. Most people who are ill have been badly treated, often by the medical profession, by family and friends, and that sort of thing. So there's frequently a lot to forgive. And then there's gratitude, often for the smallest things. There's a woman who was confined to bed and could do nothing except she had a snail in a fishbowl beside her, and she could watch that snail. And so she watched that snail for a long, long time. And she finally did improve somewhat and was able to write a book. And I think it's called Teaching a Snail to Talk, but I'm not quite sure. Anyway, a beautiful capacity to see the smallest things and understand them. And as Ken said in a recent video, forgiveness and gratitude, he was talking about forgiveness and gratitude. I think we might have played that here. Is next to God. And I thought that was just an amazing statement to make and beautiful. And then we have Leonard Cohen's song about suffering, and that's where the light gets in. So we can see suffering as a path often for accelerated spiritual development. And sometimes I think, like in between lives, are they up there and somebody says, I have this really difficult mission, and then these people put their hands up and say, I'll do it, I'll do it. And here they come and they get a serious illness. Volunteers for the difficult mission. So I think that could help us see them with some respect and maybe even deference for doing that. And then we can say that illness is a workshop for all of us, even healthy, because we can watch ourselves. We can see, how do we relate to illness and how do we relate to people who are ill? We can watch ourselves. When you see somebody in a wheelchair, for example, do you feel awkward? Do you want to avoid them? Do you not know what to say? What is your response to illness? And in illness in yourself, when something comes up in you, how do you realize, oh no, oh my God, it can't be this, or oh, I can't afford this right now, this is going to get in my way. What are the reactions that you have when illness appears? Can you see the beauty in a life with illness, like Claire was showing us? Can we see that maybe a picture in a smaller frame can be just as beautiful as a mural on a wall? We don't all have to be painting murals. Can we use it as an opportunity to practice wisdom and compassion in daily experience? How can we bring our wisdom and our compassion to this area of life? Can we be not fixers of people who are ill, but supporters, not pitying them, but welcoming them? So these are all questions that we can ask ourselves. And we can even see people with illness as bodhisattvas, teachers who have come to help us. And for those of us who've read Grace and Grit, At the end of the book, he is talking to, they've spent 5 agonizing years dealing with her breast cancer. And she is dying, and she asks him to find her after death. So he makes a promise that he will find her after death. And then when he's writing later, he says he realizes, and I'm quoting him here, I had it all backwards. I thought my promise was how I would help her, whereas it was actually how she would reach and help me again and again and forever again, as long as it took for me to awaken, as long as it took for me to acknowledge, as long as it took for me to realize the spirit that she had come so clearly to announce. And by no means just me. Treya came for all her friends, for her family, and especially for those stricken with terrible illness. For all of this, Treya was present. So I thought that was another turnaround, another way to see people with illness as here to help us, not just as another part of the landscapes. And if we were to look at them in that way, everything would change. These are the 5 questions that I sort of covered here. How can we avoid the pitfalls of quadrant reductionism and first-tier worldviews? How can we embrace illness and suffering as integral to our lives? How can we embrace people with chronic illness as full partners in our humanity? How can we see illness as a path for personal and spiritual growth? And how can we respect the people who are on this path, and how can we learn from them?